Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 50th episode of the RPG Cave, or the 50th level, if you will. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing on this lovely, lovely Monday? We finally made it to level 50. We're halfway to level 99.
This is great. Do we have a job advancement? Do we get like a second class, or what's the deal with level 50? Is there anything big?
There's nothing big at level 50. I mean,
there's nothing big. Okay.
The game just doesn't end at level 99, Garret, because, you know,
do you prestige? I mean, are we gonna prestige this?
maybe. Just like, you know, a certain game that you might have been played that we're talking about today, where the game just doesn't end when you max level, Garret. You know, you keep going after that, and you fight enemies up. You fight enemies above your level, Garret. Essentially,
pretty much.
That's what you're doing in this show. Essentially, when we get 100 episodes in, that's what it's going to be like. So there we go. And actually, it's kind of special too, because we started this show last year, like around this time last May, and we'd also started the PlayStation Drive and the Nintendo Drive around that time, and now all three of those shows have finally hit 50 episodes. So I'm so proud.
Wow.
We actually made it to this first of many milestones to come, I think, for a lot of our shows. But it's cool to see us hitting 50. In fact, Garret, we've been basically doing the show for a year now, which is just crazy to think about.
That's actually kind of crazy to think about. I still think of this as this is the new podcast I'm in the new, show with Ryan Turford. This is awesome. It's like, no, it's been 1 year. And I'm like, oh, time flies. Yep. Everything is just passing away. Time. Wow.
Now you know how it feels to be someone like me or Elaine every single day. You feel like time's just slipping away. Your life is just grains in an hourglass, just drifting by. And your knees hurt all the time. It's too much.
Hey man, we're gonna enjoy video games while we're at it. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All good.
So obviously today's topic, as you can probably tell from the title of this episode, Shin Megami Tensei V, because it's been a journey with Garret playing this game pretty much from the time we did the Shin Megami Tensei episode, because we did an episode about Shin Megami Tensei as a series the week that Shin Megami Tensei V was coming out, and then since then, Garrett's basically been playing the game since November of last year. So, we're finally here to talk about that. But before we get into all that, what we got to do? We got to, clear the dungeon of some pesky mobs, because, we don't want these trash mobs in the way. And every time we go to the segment, Garret, I always hit my microphone. It wouldn't be an episode of the RPG Cave if I didn't hit the microphone. So, folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. Number one, if you're watching us on the live stream right now on youtube.com/carpoolgaming, or if you're watching the VOD later, like Kevin Ainsworth said he would do in the morning, make sure to like the video, subscribe to us if you haven't subscribed to us already. Ding, ding, ding. Ring that bell for some notifications to be notified whenever our videos go live, or when we go live with a live stream like this one. Also, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to hit the subscribe button there. Don't forget to rate us if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And on Spotify specifically, because I've had some people ask about this, you actually have to go into Spotify app on your phone or your tablet to rate. You can't do it through the web browser. So just FYI.
That's weird. Can you do it on the desktop app itself?
I've never tried it, but I've had people tell me they've used it before and they can't find where to rate podcasts. So there's a little thing when you sign into when you're on a podcast page where it has like a 5-star there, and you click on it and you rate the podcast there. It's super easy, but you have to be on a Spotify specific app in order to do that. So just FYI that that's a thing. Also, if you want early access to all of our shows, as well as some exclusive shows like the Pants Patreon podcast for patrons podcast, head over to patreon.com/carpoolgaming, and choose the tier that's right for you. And then last but not least, we have a merch store, Garret, where if you want an RPG Cave shirt, or if you want a Carpool Gaming shirt of a different show, because we do have one for all the shows, as well as just Carpool Gaming in general, head over to our merch store as well. And then also, I lied. One last thing. This will be the last week I promote this, because I got a couple more entries from between last show and this show. Cool. But I want to kind of promote this for the last time. We're doing a quick survey over on the RPG Cave. I basically got a link to a Google form in the description of this video, basically asking you all for your feedback, like what topics do you want to see us cover? Also, if you would like to guest on the show, that's how I'm kind of fielding responses for guests. And I've reached out to some people this week, and I'm actually reaching out to more people this week as well. So if you haven't heard from me yet, but you indicated on the survey that you want to be on the show, and you haven't heard from me yet, you're probably going to hear from me this week. So just FYI,
yes,
check your Discord inboxes because I will be reaching out to y'all about that. But if you want to be part of this cool show, again, be part of the just jump into the survey. It takes a couple seconds to just throw your info there and let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll go from there. But without further ado, Garrett, it's time to read from the sacred text because, I had to carry the show as long as I could because this is going to be mostly a Garrett-filled show this week's, folks.
For sure.
Which I'm excited to kind of pick your brain about this. And the community was also very excited about this as well. That is Shin Megami Tensei V, as I mentioned in the intro again. You've been playing this forever. This has been a long journey, and you've talked about it on this show, but mostly on Shaq. Because, Rebecca
mostly on Shaq, yeah.
would ask you every week what you're playing, and it was just always Shin Megami Tensei V.
It was just that for a longest time. Yeah, I just want to, let everyone know kind of my journey with this game. Of course, it's been quite a few months. I think I put most of my time, 70%, 60-70% of my time within the last month.
Yeah.
That was kind of the majority of my gameplay with it. Initially in November, I played it for a good while. Then I had to finish a PhD in the middle of it. And then I also played some other games in between. I played Guardians of the Galaxy. I played Legends Arceus. So yeah, I took some breaks here and there, but finally got back into it. Probably mid-April, somewhere around there, beginning to mid-April, and just hacked it all the way through, beating it this past week, about a week ago.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you put that in perspective because I know when you gave your hour count on Shaq this week, I know that Elaine kind of just laughed it off and been like, "Oh, that's not even a big number of hours," but it's just how much your life has really changed. Even since this game came out, between moving and, getting your PhD done and your new job, there's been so much going on that you just didn't have as much time for games as, you used to, maybe, a year or two ago. Right. So yeah, it's easy to kind of lose sight in that when we're having conversations like this. So I'm glad that you finally were able to invest enough time and kind of stick with it to finally, finish it and kind of, give us almost like your book report today to kind of tell us, why maybe we should check this one out, or, why it's it might just be a masterpiece, as, the thumbnail for this video has totally, kind of spoiled at least a little bit. And we'll kind of get into it from here. But of course, when we start off with a game franchise or just a game in general, Garrett, we got to start with fun facts because you got to give me something to talk about on the show. But to be fair, I kept it very brief because I wanted to give you most
very
of the
brief, yes.
Because, what was interesting about Shin Megami Tensei V is we've just known about it forever, going all the way back to 2017, because this was one of the games that was announced during the Switch showcase in January of 2017. Which was one of the most insane showcases ever of, and not insane as in, man, these games are amazing, but insane is what the heck is going on with this showcase? Why is Suda51 talking 1,000,000 miles an hour, but the translator can't keep up with them? Or what is this random trailer for Shin Megami Tensei V? And yeah, it was a whole thing. Again, the cups, the ice in the cup, Garrett. That's where we got that from.
The ice cubes, man.
Yeah.
It just kept shaking and people were going wild to figure out how many ice cubes were in that darn Joy-Con.
Yeah.
And then there was this very weird, very obtuse game that a very niche crowd was very excited for.
I remember Press being very excited about it too, because I think I mentioned this on other shows, and maybe I mentioned it here as well, but one of the first press events I ever went to was the Nintendo Switch launch event, right before the Switch was coming out, where we got to play every single Switch launch game, and one of the games that was there was 1-2 Switch. And I remember that was one of the games that had the biggest press lineup of people that wanted to play it, and people had a great time with it, playing the cowboy draw game and stuff like that. And I'm just I don't know about this game. That's how I thought of it. Turns out I was the one that was right, a little bit right in the end, anyways, with 1-2 Switch. But again, I wanted to put it in perspective because it's funny because the Switch has been around for 5 years now. We're celebrating the 5-year anniversary of the Switch this year, and this is one of the first games we even got announced for the console was this game. It was pretty early on in the presentation. Before that, we just didn't know any of the games coming to the console besides Street Fighter, essentially, and NBA. So it was kind of cool that a Shin Megami Tensei game would kind of kick it off. It was also, again, the very first RPG we got announced on the console. Although later in that showcase, we also got Project Octopath Traveler as well. But
Mm-hmm.
Also, similarly, and the reason I bring this up is also took the longest out of any game out of that showcase to actually come out, because it took 5 years for it to come out, or sorry, 4 years, because it released worldwide on November 11th, 2021. But what's interesting about the release date and the release for this game, it was the first time Atlus did a worldwide release for any game, because Atlus usually puts their games out in Japan first, and then they localize them in different regions, and then they put them out there like 4 or 5 months later, or even a year later sometimes. With, we saw that with the Persona games, we saw that with a lot of their like Vanillaware games were kind of like that too. So yeah, this was the first time Atlus has done like a worldwide release for an RPG like this, which I think was a pretty big feat for them, and something that I think they're going to continue to do going forward, essentially, with all of their games going forward, where they like.
I hope so.
I think with Persona 6, like, I don't think with that game.
I hope so.
I don't think we get a delay with Persona 6. I think they do launch it when it comes out. But
I agree with that. I think Atlas is understanding Western markets, and I think especially Persona, I think it's way more popular overall than Shin Megami Tensei. And it's like, I think they have a good workflow with that voice acting and translation to hit a release date worldwide. And I think that just benefits everyone.
Yeah.
One of the last few companies making that transition, I think.
Yeah, so, especially cool. A lot of Japanese companies like Capcom and stuff. They all used to do that, but yeah, like you said, they've really all kind of transitioned over to being, at least prioritizing Japan and North America first, and then if it has to come to Europe later, we get that. We're kind of seeing that this month with AI, the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative, which is a sequel coming out. It's actually getting released in North America first, then Japan and Europe next month in July. So, which is crazy.
So weird.
Yeah. It was supposed to be a worldwide release date for all territories, but then it first got delayed in Europe, and then it got delayed in Japan. So it's coming out in North America first, which is, again, bizarre for a game like that. Like, something I would never thought, you would have seen, 5 or 10 years ago, essentially. You would have seen the opposite. Right. Where it definitely would have been delayed here and then come out in Japan first as well.
Right.
So, but yeah, so those are kind of my fun facts. I mean, for the most part, we also know that, this game was a big contender at the Game Awards last year. It wasn't up for Game of the Year, but it was up for RPG Game of the Year and some other categories. It didn't win anything, unfortunately. And to be fair, Tales of Arise, we talked about it on the show before.
Yeah.
Spoiler cast for that. I think, it was kind of a toss-up between those two games, and I think, just Tales of Arise was just a much more approachable game, I think. But yeah.
And I think Shin Megami Tensei V was very close to the deadline, to the dropout. So I feel like, I don't know, not much. The people that were voting for the awards didn't really play that game too much.
I mean, in full transparency, as someone who was on part of the voting process, I can tell you that it was the game might have been out for a day before we had to submit.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's nice to get nominated. I don't think they expected anything out of the awards.
Yeah, exactly. But it was cool to see it there, though, because we did see that for Persona 5, but beyond that, Atlus really never had a big representation at the Game Awards with a lot of their stuff. So it was good to see them recognized both for that, and then 13 Sentinels as well last year as well was also there. So good to know for that one. But otherwise, sales have been pretty strong for this game as well. So hopefully we might see some more Shin Megami Tensei action in North America going forward, Garrett. But I think it's time to start giving you the floor. So first off, I know you wanted to kind of cut this into 2 sections, and I kind of want to preface it now for anyone who's watching the live stream as well. We're going to kind of do non-spoilers first, and then spoiler talk. Kind of like what we do with a review, but this is just give me a normal episode of the show, because that's just how we do things on the RPG game. There's no rules here. There's no cops, But then, of course, the community came out in full force, Garrett, because they have a lot of questions.
They have a lot of questions, so that's awesome. So, I'm gonna just be laying out kind of what the game is, my impressions of it, and just overall aspects. I wrote down some big pillars to talk about mainly, and you can probably discuss about it too with me, is the mechanics of the game. You've played at least a few hours.
Yeah, I've played about 10 hours, but I just put it down because it was the type of experience that I just wasn't really craving at the point of time when it came out. And I just haven't gone back to it since, because it has been, a busy enough year, playing PS1 games for a certain other show, or,
That sounds
playing
great.
modern games. I mean, it is great because I love PS1 games,
I
but
bet.
it takes up more time than I was expecting. Whereas, whereas normally I might fit something like Shin Megami Tensei in a month like May, for example, like that we're in right now.
Right.
Whereas a bit slower.
Right. Sounds good.
But
I'll be talking about.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Garret.
No, I'll be mainly talking about mechanics. I'll talk about pacing in a broad perspective. No spoilers. Just like how do I think of it? Level design, atmosphere, story. I'll get into more spoilerific stuff, but I'll just say what my impressions are with the story, and then the monsters specifically.
Okay.
So I kind of broke it down like that.
It's a lot of stuff. Well,
yeah.
Let's start it off, Garret, by just talking about the fact that even though we assume most people listening to the show probably know what this game is, I want you to tell me, what Shin Megami Tensei 5 is for someone who's never played this game before or is new to the series or just hasn't really heard of this game. Because I know it was even though it sold pretty well in its first week for an Atlas game, I mean, it still was under a lot of people's radars, I think. So tell me about what this game actually is and what do you do in this game?
So Shin Megami Tensei V is a turn-based Japanese role-playing game where you are a protagonist, very similar to the Persona games, just like protagonist, whatever you want your name is a guy. And I mean, I'll kind of broke down like the synopsis of the beginning of the game because I feel like you see this in trailers. Like you see this pretty much everywhere. You basically become this being called the Nahubino, which you merge into another spiritual, sensual being, and then basically you're trying to, I would say, figure out what's the problem in Japan. Basically, they've been run over by demons spontaneously, and then you get transported some distant future of Tokyo. And then you kind of just go through the story from then on out. You get to meet a bunch of characters along the way. And there's a lot of symbolism between angels and demons, very in line with the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, where a lot of monsters are coming from ancient mythology, whether it comes from Greek or Roman or whatsoever. There's a lot of interactions with angels and demons, and you will see that throughout the story. It is a turn-based role-playing game, so basically you go into battle and you kind of collect these monsters or these demons throughout the game. In order to get these demons, you have to talk to them, and talking to them is its own separate mechanic. It is ruthless sometimes. When you talk to them, you might have to negotiate. You have to go through conversations with them, and these conversations are obtuse. It's not necessarily one. It's very hard to figure out the correct answer because you don't know their personality initially. But once you get to know that demon's personality, you get to be on their side. So once you get a bunch of these monsters in your party, it's kind of like Pokemon where they are in your party and they're fighting with you against other demons. There is a leveling system with the Nahubino and also with your monsters. And then there's like skills like Pokemon where there's various elemental attacks. And so on and so forth. So that's kind of like a broad view of what this game is. And then I kind of want to just break down a little bit more of the mechanics of this game because I feel like I just kind of like just broke the ice, like the surface of it.
Yeah.
Basically, there is a skill proficiency system. So I kind of like told you a little bit about the elements, but here's all the elements. There's physical attacks, there's fire, ice, electric, force, light, and dark magic attacks. Then there's almighty attacks, which is kind of like physical based attacks, but there's actually like it's pretty overpowered. There's no strength or weakness against it. You can't block it really. So it's like an overpowered magic attack, essentially.
Well, the way I look at it, that is like it almost feels like non-elemental magic in a lot of games, because a lot of older RPGs in particular, like if they wanted to give you like ridiculously overpowered attacks or magic attacks, they'd give you non-elemental magic attacks that would basically have no strength and weaknesses, essentially. So I think it actually kind of fills a similar niche, anyways, with that.
Yeah. Definitely. So it becomes really important in late game.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like an ailment kind of proficiency where there you can like give a monster confusion, poison, stuff like that. There's a charm proficiency, making sure how well you can charm a monster in battle, and that charm would just it's kind of like Pokemon where it's like they're just infatuated, they don't move or anything like that in their turn.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a buff and debuff skill proficiency. So there's a lot of different skills that a monster can be really good at or really weak at. On top of that, kind of like the defenses or weaknesses and strengths of various different monsters is there as well. So let's say there's a monster that's the weakness is electric, and that another monster hits electric on that monster, it'll just display out weak, and then the other person gets an extra turn on that. And that actually puts a lot of strategy in the mechanics of the battles themselves. You want to make sure that you're figuring out what the weaknesses of your enemy demons are so you can get extra turns in your game.
Yeah, which is very reminiscent of
default,
something like Persona as well, where you're very much
yes.
like, explaining the weaknesses so you can kind of gang up on the enemies kind of with your party, and that's kind of what you're doing in this game a little bit too. And the nice thing is
Yes.
too, when you kind of recruit a monster as well, you even if you haven't figured out their weaknesses and strengths, you will usually learn it as soon as basically have a monster join your party essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's basically it. Anything else? So extra things like, well, I said weak two or normal two. There's also like, they can build up resistance, blocks, or reflects on certain elements as well. And if there is a block, it will like cost 2 turns on the other turn. So that you got to keep in mind with that as well. If you put out a magic attack that tries to attack all the monsters, but one of them is like reflecting or whatever, you're kind of screwed in that battle. It's like, okay, that turn's done. It's gonna go to the enemy's turn, and they're gonna go through their moves. This game, once you go through the initial battles, you can tell it's pretty ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you want to be at the upper advantage as much as you can, and that means like detect it, make sure you go into a battle. And I should explain how you get into a battle. It's like free roaming third person around, and then you kind of like hit. It's kind of like in a lot of RPGs these days, you kind of like hit a monster and then you instantly go into a turn-based battle. You want to make sure you're hitting them first. If they hit you, it's going to be an enemy phase first, and that's not so good in this game. You might get pretty beat up in one turn. And that's kind of like, how punishing this game can be.
Mm-hmm.
They'll exploit your weaknesses. Like they'll know it and they'll exploit it. Bosses have unlimited what is called mana points or MP, and that's what you use to cost you like basically your magic skills and
Right.
whatnot. So yeah, this game is known in this franchise is known to be a little bit tougher, a little bit more punishing than, let's say, a Pokemon game or Persona, really. I mean, Persona can get tough, but this game is tough from the get-go or like from the beginning. It's initially challenging, and then once you lose, if you lose your character, like you're like in battle, you're going straight to the title screen, and you're gonna go back to your previous save. And to give you perspective, my save file is 86 hours. That does not include my deaths. My deaths include another 10 hours in there. So
it's a lot of deaths.
Take it what you will. If you're into it, great.
Yeah.
It is a challenging game.
So
what are you about to say?
What I was going to say, actually, is I wanted to bring in the Muffin Mon on Discord, who asks, I've only played Persona because, much like Dark Souls, I've heard that Shin Megami Tensei has a brutal difficulty. How do you find this? Is it exaggerated? I mean, clearly, we've just talked about a year. I don't think it's exaggerated, because I think both you and I both agree the difficulty in this game is really hard. Even if you played the game on easy, it's actually pretty difficult. Yeah. But at the same time, I think we both agree as well about this point. Correct me if I'm wrong, Garrett, but I think, like, Shin Megami Tensei V, out of when you compare it to the other Shin Megami Tensei mainline titles, is probably the easiest one of the 5. Would I be correct in saying that?
I would say it is the most accessible
Right.
The one that you can like kind of get out of like a kind of a pitfall if you're in like kind of a tight spot or
Yeah. Yeah, you're
whatever.
not like
This
pigeonholed like in Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, where you can really put
right.
yourself into a corner. You basically have to start the whole game over unless you made like 5 different saves as you progress through the game, essentially.
Hmm. So yeah, throughout an open world, there's these save points called leyline fountains, and in these leyline fountains, you can save your game unlimited times. You can recover your party uh, with a certain amount of money, and you can go to a store and to a dark world to fuse your monsters or whatnot. And they're kind of scattered throughout the open world, pretty nicely, pretty sparsely. Um, you eventually get an item in the game where, if you're playing on normal um, you can just press a button and like instantly go back to that previous leyline fountain,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere in that open world. And I think that just helps, kind of new players getting into this game. Is like, hey, I died. Now I'm like, okay, I'm figuring out I'm in a very tight spot in this game. I can't pass these like monsters up front or behind. At least they have that one mechanic to let a certain character go back to the ley line fountain and be at a safer spot than they were previously were. So yes, I definitely agree. It's a brutal difficulty, but it is the most accessible Shin Megami Tensei game out of the whole
Yeah.
franchise.
Also,
Yeah.
I love this question too from Kevin because I know Kevin's beaten Monarch, and we know like what kind
Oh
of crazy
goodness,
stuff you
yeah.
have to go through to try and beat that game because of the difficulty spikes in that game. So I feel like if Kevin can probably beat Monarch, he could probably beat this game as well, right, Garrett?
Yeah,
Like,
and
it just
and
takes
he
time and
mentioned
patience.
Dark Souls, which is an interesting comparison, and I actually that's probably the most great comparison with an
Mhm.
action RPG. Dark Souls is hard, it's difficult, but you can figure it out,
Mhm.
and given enough time, you can brute force it if you want to. You could grind it if you want to. That's the same thing here. And it's like, hey, it just takes a lot of time to understand what the boss level is, what the monsters are, so on and so forth. But once you get it, like I feel like after 10 hours, 15 hours, it's like once you understand the mechanics that's going on, you can traverse this game pretty well,
Yeah.
and get to the end, I think.
No, and actually, now that you've kind of broken, when you were talking about ley lines, like a thought crossed in my head when you were talking about that because they almost remind me of like the bonfires in something like Dark Souls because they're almost like
Yeah.
spaced that way because there actually is a lot of space that you have to travel between different ley lines essentially where they're not very close together. They're like older RPGs, like even going back to Super Nintendo RPGs, you'd find save points,
Hmm.
pretty frequently, like usually 1 or 2 per dungeon. Plus, you can save anywhere in the overworld map. Whereas Shin Megami Tensei V, you've basically got one ley line, and then you're running. You maybe play for an hour or two before you find the next one, essentially. So I
Yes.
think they're much farther spaced out versus a lot of old school RPGs, anyways, with save points.
Hmm. Hmm. So yeah, I kind of like revealed a little bit of the battle system, a little bit of kind of how the mechanics work and the affinities and weaknesses. The last thing I want to mention is skills. All the monsters, once you get them, they have a base amount of skills, and then as you level them up, they learn more a set number of skills. And if you level that goes away. I think it's like after 3 or 4 skills. And then if you level them up like constantly a little bit more, it's kind of randomized when you can get a new skill, and the skill can be super random.
Mhm.
So it gets to that point. Sometimes they'll give you an essence when you level them up, an essence I will talk about a little later, or an item that will help you out. The way the Nahubino, or your main protagonist, gets skills is what I'm gonna go to next about essences. Is you go to the ley line fountain, and then you go to this different world called the World of Shadows, and this is where you're able to fuse monsters together from your existing party to get a new, stronger monster, and you can inherit skills and stuff like that. Um, or you can like give your protagonist new skills from an essence. And this essence is basically like an item that's like a copy or blueprint of that monster. And that essence can has a certain like set skills. It could be fire, electric, it could be anything really. But then you can put it into your protagonist anytime during the game, and that kind of helps you out, especially in bosses, where you know what the boss's weaknesses are. You die because you always die at the boss. But you go back to the Leyline Fountain and you prepare. It's like, okay, so this boss shoots ice skills, so I'm gonna have ice resistance. I'm gonna put in a lot of fire skills in my Nahubino from these essences that I've just collected over time. So I thought that was a neat little mechanic to add. You can also, for the Nahubino, as I said, change the affinities, but then eventually for your monsters, you can force learn them skills from essences as well. And so you can really mix and match a lot of different things with your party, especially with fusing monsters and then inheriting these skills.
Yeah, there's a lot of customization in the game where you're not not forced to go down one path. Although, I mean, I haven't really looked up guides for SMT5, but I imagine there's like probably like optimized path that is like do this, and this, and then this is like the perfect path, or like the easiest. It's kind of like the most streamlined playthrough essentially of like here's all the skills you should be looking for with this set of monsters going forward. Essentially, is what I'm imagining there. But again, it sounds like it gives you a lot of freedom there when it comes to that. But it also gives you the freedom to make bad choices too, and kind of again picking yourself a little bit if you don't pick the correct choices, or if you have a weakness to a boss that comes up and basically one shots you, kind of thing.
They kind of help you out, like, if you die and you go to your previous save file and you're in the save point before, it's like, okay, let me hunt some monsters around the area right before the boss and see what you can find. And maybe you'll end up with a monster that's doing pretty good against the boss, or you'll get enough monsters in your party to fuse a new monster in the World of Shadows. So basically, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of customization to it. I feel like a lot of guides about SMT5, it's more like boss based. So they'll like, hey, this is the boss, this is the weakness and strengths of that boss. This is what they do in the battle, and this is like kind of what the monsters we recommend you kind of put in there. So yeah, it's more streamlined if you follow a guide.
More like it actually kind of probably reminds me of like reading a guide for like an old Mega Man game, like Mega Man 2, for example, where it's like, here's all the robot masters and here's what they're, weak to, essentially. Because that's what you're kind of figuring out. Like that, the whole loop of that game is figuring out, what robot master is weak to what weapon, essentially. And I imagine that's probably what you're doing. Like that's what you do a lot in this game too, where you're figuring out. It's a lot about figuring out different weaknesses of whatever you're going to fight, especially bosses in particular.
Yeah. The last thing I want to mention about the World of Shadows is the mechanic called miracles, and these are permanent upgrades that kind of just opens up more things for you to do during the game. Kind of examples is that it unlocks more skill slots in your monsters, or in the Nahubino. It opens up more party slots, so you can add more demons into your party throughout. In order to get these miracles, you have to find these little things that I swear they got it from the Korok seeds from Breath of the Wild. They're called Mimons, and these little demons that are kind of just sprinkled out throughout the world. And once you get enough of these Mimons, then you're able to get these miracles, and these miracles are kind of like set. It's a point system, and so they have different strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of critical miracles that you would like to get early game and in late game. So yeah, just when you go throughout the game, maybe check out a guide and see what you want to add first, and then throughout the end. It really makes the game easy. I feel like it makes it a lot easier once you get certain miracles opened up.
At least too, they give you some kind of reward for that. Whereas like, again, when you compare it to Korok seeds and what your reward for is from that, where you're like, why did you even bother doing this? Where it's like, it sounds like there's a fundamental reason to go out and seek out these collectibles, which is something I like from collectibles in games, where I like when there's like an extra little hook on the like a carrot on the end of the string that's like, hey, there's a reason why you want to collect all this stuff, rather than just being a completionist, essentially.
And it's actually throughout each open world map. Near the end, there is a small character that if you give them a certain amount of money, they will identify every single collectible for you in the map, which is very useful. Um, Especially during late game where I try to um, pick up as much Mimon as I can to kind of maximize certain miracles. So I can face this disastrous boss at the end that I will mention later. Um, Other than that, items. I want to mention about items because I feel like most RPGs, and this is personal experience, most RPGs, items are kind of this saving grace or this kind of extra thing that you barely touch.
Like they're basically an afterthought is what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, they are an afterthought, but items in here are not an afterthought. They are essential, especially the spyglass, which is that's the item that reveals all the weaknesses and strengths, which is really nice to see. And then there's magic attacks that you can buy. So you can buy like, an ice gem or a force gem or whatever. And those are really critical. If you don't have monsters in your party that has that weakness towards an enemy demon, you can use that instead. And you get extra turns. There are healing ailments because, like, let me tell you, these enemy demons, they will throw in every single ailment at you. So it's always good to have that. Of course, healing potion items and stuff like that. But yeah, I had to use items quite a bit. I always had to go back to the leyline fountain, go to the item shop, and just refill like at least every other leyline fountain that I saw. I'm just like,
and
right,
I think a
items.
lot of that just has to do with, and at least I noticed this in the early hours in the game, where it's just, I feel like the magic in this game is much more toned down versus magic in a lot of other RPGs.
Yes.
In terms of, it being super useful, which is what forces you to use items a lot more. Whereas a lot of RPGs that I find that I don't use items in are ones where it's like, oh, my healing is so good anyways, and it just recharges when I get to the save point. Why would I bother using healing items? Like, that's kind of like the trap that a lot of RPGs kind of fall into. Whereas this game, if you're going to survive, you got to make sure to kind of use like every resource that's available to you, especially items in particular. Like, even again in the early game, even though I didn't make it that far, I noticed that like pretty quickly with this game.
Yeah, magic attacks. They're very useful to get weak attacks in there so you can have an extra turn. And then, man, there's just so much strategy in the mechanics of this game. I feel like near the end, I had to change strategy left and right. I had demons that were full on attack in like the later bosses, which was not a good strategy because they just kept just destroying my like demons and with no healing, barely any healing. And then I didn't actually do as much attack because I wasn't debuffing the enemy party. So I had to get at least one character in there that was full on support. So I had I enhanced my attack and defense in my party and then put down the defense in the enemy party. And then I was finally able to hold my own throughout a battle. So you definitely, throughout the game, got to change strategy, in which and I'm glad they have a lot of customization involved. So yeah, I think the mechanics in here is one of the best for turn-based. I think it's kind of the pinnacle for Atlas. Like I would say Persona SMT battle system. This is probably the most refined one that I've seen. I'm not saying that the other ones were bad or anything like that. They're really good too. It's just I think they have another leveled up with this one. Yeah. They made some smart design choices in this game.
Yeah. No, and honestly, they had to make it that kind of pitch perfect, or else the game would probably really feel unfair, especially in the later stages as well. Like much more unfair than it feels already, because you'd feel like the mechanics are maybe failing you or something like that. But because they had to properly tweak how often you used magic or items, and then I think how the skill system works and stuff like that too. Like I feel like, yeah, you're probably right about that. Especially again when you compare it to other Shin Megami Tensei games. When you compare it to Persona, again, Persona is just more simplified and streamlined because that's just the flavor of that game, and it makes more sense in that that game in particular to kind of do that. But at the same time, you're probably right. Like, this is probably the most technically sound combat system in any of their games, probably.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what got me really hooked, and that's what actually motivated to go to the end, which I'll explain. So I'm kind of done with mechanics. Cool. I think we've kind of explained a lot of it out of there in great detail, with the way the customization works, the gameplay. So good.
So before we move on, Garret, if I may interject, I'm going to bring in Quagmire here, who asks a question. Right. What are your thoughts on the overall story? I thought it seemed very light on story for a JRPG, but could be par for the course for Shin Megami Tensei, as it was my first game in the series. So again, I'm going to transition you a little bit, Garret, because I wanted to cover this a little bit. What did you think about the story overall in Shin Megami Tensei? Again, we're going to talk about spoilers in a bit, but what do you think, broad view of the story with this game?
The story, I completely agree with you, Quagmire. It's not really a story. It is just a device that the designers use in order to progress their game or make a game. It was kind of, I feel like it was just teeter-tattered on top. There wasn't much. I don't think they were meant to make a great story out of this. Just thinking about what the story is, it's so abstract. You meet characters along the way, and then they just kind of eliminate their motivation or their purpose, or they just have like this ends. They're just ends to a means to the end of the story. I feel like it was like, oh, we need someone that can be this guy at the end. It was like, all right, let's just throw him in here, and it just didn't feel like they had much thought to the story itself. So if you're looking for a JRPG that has a fantastic story, it's not going to be this game. You're going to be disappointed throughout. I feel like it's great cutscenes, great presentation. I like the presentation of the story. It was kind of cool to see the scenes and the action that happened around it, but kind of just the logic behind it. The characters, it just, you're like, all right, this is the game, let's just keep on going. Basically, it just doesn't make sense most of the time.
And actually that's kind of how I felt about and by the way, I saw Sean in the chat mentioned my audio was a little bit low, and I hope this is a little bit better. So I actually I felt that way about like Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, which is the game I'm most familiar with as far as the Shin Megami Tensei games are concerned. And that one, like, the story itself also just really felt like an afterthought. Like, it was a game that just, you were playing it for the gameplay. And it kind of, again, goes back to that comparison we had about comparing it between that and Dark Souls a little bit earlier. Where, again, like, Dark Souls has a story if you're looking for it. It's all about kind of environmental storytelling. And it's not really trying to tell you, like, an overly, complex narrative or anything like that. But it is, they tell you at least a little bit, just enough to kind of get you in whatever location you're in and kind of establish the world. And I feel like that's kind of what this game does too in a lot of ways as well. Like, it's really like the gameplay. Like, the reason why you focused on mechanics for so long, Garret, was because like the gameplay is what really kept you playing with this game.
Yeah. No, that I totally agree with that. So that's what I want to say about the story for now without spoilers. It's just don't be too excited for it.
so then to kind of like finish answering Quagmire's question, because you've also, you're also a big fan of Shin Megami Tensei 4. How does the story compare between this game and that game? Like, do you think the story is much better in 4?
I feel like 4 did a little bit better job with at least with the characters. You actually felt some motivation behind the main protagonist, and I don't know if you know the premise behind 4, but you're basically in an academy, and you're trying to fend off demons in this medieval kind of academy with your friends. And there's a lot of great exposition and relationships going on into that game, and compared to 5, which kind of just force-feed itself. Like, I remember you mentioning part of the game where it's like, oh, it's kind of like Persona, where you have like a gang of kids together and students together, and it's kind of cool to see this little spin-off of this game being a little bit more colorful or whatever, and it's just like that's there and then it's out.
Yeah.
It's not there anymore. It's flickered off. So yeah, I would say 4 is a little bit better with the story. But it's not comparable to a Persona game. I would say. So,
yeah, definitely. If you want story in like a Shin Megami Tensei spin-off, you're looking at Persona, you're looking at Tokyo Mirage Sessions, you're looking at something like Digital Devil Saga on PlayStation 2. You're not really looking at, the mainline Shin Megami Tensei games, I think. Because again, they're more about the combat and like actual mechanics versus the story anyways. So that makes it a little sense anyways. So then I know you also wanted to talk about monsters as well, Garrett. Before we get into spoilers. And TPR brings up a question about this and asks, did this game introduce you to the gods of different cultures that you wouldn't have known about without the game? If so, which one in your experience was the most intriguing? So I know and I wanted to bring this up as we kind of transition to monsters, because a lot of the monsters are based off of, gods or deities or other, demons and angels from other cultures, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think TPR brings up an interesting question here. So Garrett, take it away. First of all, what do you think about, TPR's question? Second of all, let's talk about some monsters.
Yeah, I really enjoy the monsters throughout all of the Persona and Shin Megami Tensei lines. They all have some sort of mythological connection, whether it's Roman, Greek, Chinese. It's everything, guys. It's like it goes through all the mythological creatures, and they just kind of mix them all around into one. So super cool to see. There are some very important demons out there. I don't know if I want to mention them too much because they sprinkle out throughout the story. Hold on, I'm looking at one that I used quite often late game. I just want to make sure I got the pronunciation right. It's and I'm sure everyone's gonna laugh at this one. I think there's so many demons, guys, in the Compendium.
There's so many. To be fair, Garrett's not exaggerating. There's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, there's a lot more than a regular Pokemon list. Fionn Mac Come Hell. He is of, I think, Irish descent. He is an Irish god, and
sounds
there's
like
a lot
an
of
Irish
story.
name.
Yes. A lot of lore behind him. Very cool character design. I love kind of he's a warrior humanoid, but has antlers attached to the top, and he is very integral. He has a lot of kind of like a knight or whatever, a leader. He looks super cool. What else? I love Zako, which you actually meet quite in the beginning of the game. This rendition of Zako is very different than the previous ones. It's more of a pixie-like demon that has kind of like her own type of issues that she needs to deal with as well, but it helps the Nahubino. Kind of like detecting items. It's kind of like the demon's kind of like a radar, and it's like, okay, there's like a hidden treasure right there. Why don't you go grab it?
Yeah.
So and then she becomes a demon that's in your party that becomes pretty powerful. What else? Oh my gosh. The later demons one, there's a Chinese dragon one that was super cool character design. Hold on, I just want to make sure I get the.
Is it a Shenron ripoff of some kind?
Possibly. It's like Luong Kong or something like that. Hold on, let me see if I can dragon demons. Oh my gosh, I just had it too. Sorry guys, I just wanted to check.
Dead air. I'm gonna be cutting all this out of the audio version.
Huang Long. Huang Long. He's actually a pretty powerful demon near at the end. From Chinese lore. And he looks super dope. Very godlike. Very like, kind of spiritual, almighty, as you can see. So yeah, check some of those demons out because I love the character art behind it.
Nice. That's
so
cool.
Anyways, yeah, I love the monsters in there. Is super cool, very imaginative. Of course, everyone's favorite demon, Mara. search at your own risk, guys. All right.
Again, we have to bring it up every time, but it's just like
yes.
someone out there is going to end up searching it, Garret. We can't we can't stop people from doing it, but it's wrong, Garret. It's wrong. But I love definitely. Like Atlas's take on a lot of these monsters in all of their games as well. So yeah, I think I know in the early stages I think they did a good job with it. And it sounds like in the late game didn't really disappoint either. So.
No, yeah, I loved all the Greek gods too, like Loki's in there. Oh man, what else? Thor was in there as well. I like that rendition of it. Yeah, there's just so many in there to count for. I was really focused, other than the character art, I was really focused on skills and bringing up those skills and inheriting them throughout the game when I was fusing monsters. It got to the point on a lot of them late game where I was able to bring in passive skills, these skills that are not meant to be in battle, but is a permanent fix to the monster that made it to where there was no weaknesses in the affinities. Had a bunch of MP in there, and that really helped me late game. You don't want any weaknesses at all in late game, or else you'll probably die in one turn.
Yeah. Unless the enemy, for example, doesn't have an attack of that weakness, I guess. But, I mean, there's probably not many chances where you're going to run into that in the late game.
Yeah, and there was a lot of bosses at the end that turns out to be fusible monsters, or you can, and that's the great thing about this game too, is like once you beat a boss, most likely later in the game or right afterwards, you're able to make that monster, infuse it, and become your own. And it was super cool.
Nice. Well, now that we got all that out of the way, Garret, before we move into spoilers, I'm gonna bring in the rest of the questions in now, I think.
Okay, sure. Sounds good.
Because I feel like, unless there's something else you want to cover after we're done the questions here, I think we've covered most of the stuff we're going to cover before spoiler talk. So I'm going to run through here. We're going to start with Famous Seamus at Famous Seamus, and he's the most famous of all Seamuses. I think it was also his birthday yesterday. So happy birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, man.
Yeah. So Seamus asks, is Shin Megami Tensei V a good entry point to someone who's new to Shin Megami Tensei? If not, what games would be a good entry point in the series? So if you want to get onto the mainline Shin Megami Tensei games, then I think we talked about it before, but I think both of us probably agree that it's probably this one is the best entry point. But
yeah, definitely.
If you want to dabble in this type of game, but aren't ready to dive into the mainline Shin Megami Tensei games, then I think you should explore one of the side games first. Whether it's Persona, whether it's Tokyo Mirage Sessions, or Digital Devil Saga. To Seamus's point, because he was asking, what a good entry point would be if it wasn't, this game in particular. And I think actually, again, like Persona, for example, I think gives you a good taste of what the combat is like in a mainline Shin Megami Tensei game without being as punishing. And then if you're looking for more of a challenge, then that's when you get into a game like this. Especially too, because like as we alluded to, you're not really playing this one for the story either. So it's like if you're put off by the gameplay, then it's not going to stick with you for a long time, right? So you want to make sure you're kind of ready for that first. So yeah, if you feel like you can dive into the challenge right away, then yeah. I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, Garret, but I think 5 is probably the best way game to jump into, right?
Yeah, 5 is probably the most accessible one out of all of them. I think Famous Seamus is a huge Persona nerd, if I recall correctly. So, like, if you've beaten Persona games, I think the next, I think Shin Megami Tensei is a great entry point, like any kind of game for you. You can, so other than in SMT5, you can, for other systems, you could do SMT3 Nocturne HD, which is out on PS4 and PC as well.
And Switch.
For 3DS and Switch. And then for 3DS, definitely SMT4 first, and then 4 Apocalypse, because 4 Apocalypse is a straight sequel.
Yeah, you don't want to play that one first.
Yeah, but I heard 4 is very hard to, like, the initial hours of that, like the first 10 hours, it's like brutal. It's like you can get into a pitfall and die and restart the game. So be wary of that one.
No, and Shin Megami Tensei 3 is actually like the same. It's very difficult, like even in the starting. And again, like I said, you could get 5 or 10 hours into it and be totally screwed and have to start the whole game over again.
Mm-hmm.
That's not uncommon for that game. Let alone 20 hours and you finally have the same problem. So that's a game where it's like, yeah, I didn't level up enough, and there's no enemies around that are a level enough where I can kill them. So I guess I just got to start over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So it's so rough.
So yeah, 5 is probably the best. If you're going to start with a mainline one, 5 is probably the best one. But otherwise, again, spin-off games are great too in the series. Even something like Digital Devil Saga, again, even though it's on PlayStation 2, I think it's actually a really solid entry of 2 games as well to check out as well. But next up, the Don Rob at Rob Duggan asks, I've never played a Shin Megami Tensei game before, or Persona actually. I have so much to play and not a lot of time because Rob has 5 kids, he claims. Currently, I'm playing Triangle Strategy and it's awesome. Should I even consider playing Shin Megami Tensei V? Seems like it took you forever and it might be one that will sit on the backlog because, Garrett, you talked about your hour count, being in the high 80s, even just, if you went through it without dying. And then if you did die, you're looking at about 100 hours. So probably not a wise choice for someone who's got 5 kids. Garrett, do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it is SMT5 is for that type of gamer that wants that challenge for a turn-based game. That's harder than Persona. That's harder than Pokemon. They're like, hey, I need a challenge. This is it. Like, this is kind of the highest difficulty you can get out of a turn-based monster catching, fusing monster game. I have a high hour count because I wanted to get an optional boss out of the way. And that boss is by far the hardest boss I've ever fought in the game or ever in general in terms of turn-based games. That's the hardest one. So I think I grinded a little bit more. I may have beaten the game at 75 hours if I didn't do that. Yeah,
it's not so bad then. Or not as bad, I should say. But that's still, that's still Assassin's Creed Valhalla territory at that point. So it's still a lot to ask even for someone who's got a family. Whereas, again, it took you a few months even to beat the game too, Garrett. So, I mean, there's that to kind of consider here as well. It's just like if I was expecting Sean Capri, who I saw in the chat earlier, if he was going to play this game, I would expect him to take 4 or 5 months probably to finish this game with how long it takes.
Yeah, and I also want to say I wouldn't say it's an easy pick up and play, but it's certainly easier to pick up and play than an action role-playing game. Because an action role-playing game has a flow to it. You have certain button combos, certain time cues or whatever. Whereas this one, it's like you sit on it, think about it, get it refreshed in your mind. And that's why I was able to play a little bit, take a break, and then get back into it because I'm just so used to these turn-based games. Yeah.
All right, next up, Yarden at Yarden Angel says, I've kind of given Garrett a hard time about how long it has taken him to complete the game. Sorry about that. I know Shin Megami Tensei games have always been lengthy. Now that you've finished it, what's your honest opinion of the length? Was it justified or should it have been streamlined a bit? So what do you think about the pacing overall for this game, Garrett? Do you think they could have made it shorter?
Actually one of the biggest highlights of it is that I wish the pacing was better in this game. It's you go in these ebbs and flows of big open world level. You're gonna spend 20 or 30 hours in that open level. Okay, here's this short little tidbit of transition to the story, and then here's all the story stuff. All right, 15 minutes later, okay, now you're back into this big open world. Another 20 hours of your life. So lengthy, I would say, it's shorter than a Persona game, which is nice.
Yeah.
But because the story is not the focus of the game at all, I wish the game would cut, especially the ending, the last open area and the levels behind it. It was too much. It was okay, you are 20 hours too long.
Yeah.
You can make this a tight 40-hour experience, and I would be completely satisfied with this game. So that would mean a little bit faster pacing with the monsters and the leveling up and the bosses being a little bit more comprehensive and not this exaggerated, elongated. Let me tell you, the last big area, there's at least like there in terms of required bosses, there is like 6 or 7 required bosses near the end game. And then on top of that, there's another like 15 to 20 optional bosses.
Of course.
So it just gets stupid at the end in terms of the pacing of this game. But yeah, Yarden, I wish this game was cut in half.
Yeah.
It was cut in half. I would be totally fine with that.
No, and that's something. Again, we kind of touched on that when we talked about the best short, like the shortest RPGs of all time, and we've mentioned on the show I think a couple times now, where it's just like I'm the type of person that also really hopes that a direction that a lot of RPGs start to move in is like not giving you endless content and making it a tight 30 to 50 hour experience. Essentially, that's kind of like the sweet spot for a lot of RPGs. I think like that's like, I don't know if when Persona 6 rolls around, if I'm going to be as excited to jump into it for another 120 hours, because every Persona game since Persona 3 has gotten longer and longer with each new entry, because again, the Persona 3 is manageable.
Crazy, yeah.
You can finish that in about 30 to 40 hours. And then Persona 4 was much longer than that. That's like 60 to 70 hours. And then Persona 5, it's like 100 hours plus. So it's like, gosh. I really hope that that's a trend we see happen more often, because that's one of the things that I loved about Tales of Arise when we talked about Tales of Arise last year. It's like, that felt like the perfect length for a game. I know Sean and I have our differences of opinion on that one, because Sean actually wishes it was a little bit shorter because of the way the story kind of works out. But in that game, but I know like, even if it's just 40 hours and they gave you, and that was with the optional extra stuff, like I'd be happy with something like that at full price. Like I'm not always looking for an RPG to be, 100 hours long. Like not every RPG needs to do that. Like if it feels story-wise like it needs to do that, like something like Final Fantasy 14, for example, then yeah, I'm okay with that. If it feels like, it's not plotting in certain areas, or if it doesn't feel like you're doing like 10 hours of filler or something like that. Which kind of sounds like what happened with the ending in Shin Megami Tensei V, where it almost, the way you describe it, Garret, it almost feels like you're doing like 10 to 20 hours of filler in the end location to get to the ending, essentially, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, no, that definitely was it. I was like, all right, can we get to the end now? Basically.
Yeah. Also, I loved too when you would talk about it on Shaq, because I remember for weeks you'd be like, all right, I think I'm in the final area now, you guys. I think I'm almost there.
So, funny thing behind it, I was in this area where I looked up a guide. I'm like, okay, in the like the tab section of this, the area was like the last tab of that page or whatever on the website. And I'm like, I must be in the last area. This is super cool. Nope, I was in the dungeon of the second to last area. And then I had to do this big turning point of the story, and then the last open area. And that last open area is like, no joke, 40 hours.
Of course
it was 30 to 40 hours of my time. It was that last area. Yeah, the pacing of it is a little ridiculous.
Yeah, seems very inconsistent to me anyways, but that's how I feel about it. So, last question comes to us from Brian Eck over on YouTube. And by the way, shout out to Brian Eck, by the way, who always is in there, the comments with just about every show that we do, asking questions there or asking questions on the Discord. So huge shout out to Brian for being awesome. So Brian asks, Shin Megami Tensei V was my first mainline Shin Megami Tensei game. What game in the series should I play next? So this is an interesting call. And I think, again, as we kind of alluded to earlier with Seamus's question, I think it just depends on what direction you want to go in. If you want more of this type of game, like if you want one that's like focused on mechanics and combat, then I think you go with, probably a Shin Megami Tensei 4 is probably the best bet. Like I probably wouldn't recommend 3 unless you played 4 first, because 3 is just brutally difficult. I actually think, from what I've read, not just my anecdotal evidence of playing the game, but from what I've read from other people saying this, from who played 3 and 4, they say that 3 is way harder than 4. So, and 4 is hard enough already. So
Yeah, 4
I
is
think it's
pretty
just
rough too.
I think it doesn't hold up as well as Shin Megami Tensei 4 does. So I would say if you want to go in that lateral direction, that's probably where you go next, right, Garrett? What do you think?
I agree. Yeah, 4 is probably a great one. If you have 3DS, that's awesome. Go get the game either on the eShop or get it physically. I don't know if it's I don't know what the price is physically these days, but
Oh,
I
it's
think it's
expensive.
still on the digital store for retail price, and it goes on sale. So keep a lookout still for a possible sale with these Shin Megami Tensei games
Yeah,
because they
they've been
still
on sale
do
a
that
couple
on
times,
3DS.
but I don't know if they're going
Yeah,
to keep doing that now that they've disabled credit cards on
yeah,
the store. Because you do have
that's
to
true.
fill up your eShop wallet either on your Switch or get a gift card essentially in order to be able to buy stuff. So
Yeah,
that is kind of a bummer, unfortunately. But it does go on sale from time to time. But even if you don't get the sale price, I think it's still just $15. You know, even if it's not on sale, which is way
I think it's
cheaper.
20.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's still even at 20, way cheaper than a physical copy because the physical copy is like $100 right now for just the cartridge, let alone a complete copy.
Yeah.
So like
Gosh.
3ds in particular has really exploded in price in the last like year. Pretty
Oh,
much ever
great.
since they announced the store's closing. So like all those games, like if you see a 3DS game in a store right now that you're at all interested in, you should buy it now because it's going to just that's the cheapest it'll ever be
It's just gonna go away
forever. Yeah.
in the ether, the black market.
Well, yeah, it won't go
Oh,
away. It'll just be expensive. So
it'll just be super expensive to
yeah.
get now. I hear the first two Shin Megami Tensei games. I mean, they're rough too, and they're pretty rudimentary.
Yeah.
But I do hear that they have a lot more demonic and angelic character design, which is kind of interesting to hear compared to what they have now. I feel like they've been slowly more like human personalized, like more of a human-like nature,
Mhm.
more of a Japanese culture type of like being like skinny or slender or something like that. Whereas the classic 1 and 2 games, they were really heavy on the mythological stuff. On the
Mhm.
like the demons look like they're actual demons from mythology, which is kind of cool to see.
Yeah. But the
So
only
if you're
downside with
interested
those
in that,
ones is
check it.
that if you want to play those now, you do have to find fan translations of them because we don't
Oh
have them in
gosh,
English because they're on Super Famicom only. So you
they're
do have
only
to
on the 1 and 2 is Super Famicom only.
Super
Okay,
Famicom only. We talked about that on the Shin Megami Tensei episode. Where
I
it's just like,
forget things. You know
yeah,
me.
I think because I'm like 95% sure, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, folks, but I'm like 90% sure that remembering correctly that 3 was the first one we got in North America, the first mainline
3
game.
is the first one we got in North America.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
because
Cool.
likewise, like we
Sounds
didn't
good.
get If here either. In fact, fun thing about Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2, they're on the Switch, Nintendo Switch Online for
In
Super
Japan.
Famicom, but you have to, but
Yeah,
they're in Japanese, so good luck trying to play them, essentially. But they're
don't
there,
do that.
just like the Fire Emblems games, they're there as well. So just waiting for you to play them.
Mhm.
Oh man, imagine if we had all those games, Garrett, translated to North America on the Nintendo Switch Online. Whoo-wee! That'd be a good
It
service.
would make too much sense.
It would make too much sense. Yeah, because the series had kind of like again we talked about it on that episode too, but the series had taken like a really big gap between Shin Megami Tensei the 2 and then 3 essentially because they didn't release the next one until the PlayStation 2 and they were doing Persona on PlayStation 1
Yeah,
and that was kind of like the Shin Megami Tensei games we got of that console generation essentially.
got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
But there we go. That's all the questions that y'all wanted to ask.
All
Again, a
the
huge shout out to
questions.
everyone for asking us all the questions for this particular episode. But Garrett, you want to regale us with some spoilers?
Yeah. Before I get into spoilers, just a couple minutes. I want to talk about the atmosphere of this game,
Okay.
which I think is the one of the biggest positives out of this game than the mechanics. I really enjoyed traversing in the open world of these different levels. There's about like 4 open worlds levels throughout the game. It makes you. It's post-apocalyptic stuff. There's a lot of demons and angels around. It really made you feel like you're in this bizarre world, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of tie-in to futuristic vibes, but along with like mythology and demons, and so it's just this weird cataclysm of like different, like mashup of different, I don't know, symbolism and atmosphere. I really enjoyed it. They really exploited that a lot throughout the game. Even though the story's not that great, I really enjoyed not the atmosphere around the level design. Super cool. I like the first open world where it's a very open desert, and then you go run throughout the level, and then you see the Tokyo. It was it the Tokyo Eiffel Tower or something like
It's
that. I
Tokyo
think
Tower
it was.
specifically.
That's the Tokyo Tower. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very cool to see these landmarks throughout the game. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that the atmosphere, the vibe, the music behind this game, select ones off of Spotify, you can kind of see them throughout like the number of plays. Like check the highest ones out because they're really cool battle music. I really got hooked into them. It has a certain vibe to it. I don't know how to explain it. It's futuristic, but it's also just like I don't know, like
It's like a
techno
weird like
type of
cultural
deal.
mishmash of stuff. Like it kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of, and I know you don't play Magic the Gathering, Garrett, but you know
Mhm.
Magic the Gathering did a recent set called Return to Kamigawa, essentially, where or Kamigawa Neo Dynasty, where it was basically taking all about the fusion of like cyberpunk Japan and fusing it with Japanese mythology and kind of like the clashing of those ideas together, and it being kind of like representation of modern Japan, which is basically like old Japan versus new Japan, and those kind of clashing a little bit when it comes to a lot of stuff. I got the same feeling from Shin Megami Tensei V, where again it's like taking like futuristic Japan, but also it clashing with like Japanese mythology in an interesting way.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that which is kind of cool. Also, it was cool to see those landmarks too, because I've been doing a lot of those in person, so I love seeing. I always love
Cool.
getting a chance to seeing those in games because we don't. I've said it
Yeah.
on the show before, but I don't think we get enough games that are actually set in Japan, anyways, or modern Japan, anyway. But anyways,
So there you go.
there we
That's
go.
that's what I want to mention about the atmosphere. All right, guys, I'm gonna just go into a little bit more spoilers.
So
Folks
you've
out
been
there,
warned. You've been warned.
you've been warned. I'm gonna be mentioning about a little bit of characters and then what goes on at the ending and then why it's so um not so great. It's just very dumb. I just think the story is dumb.
All right, hit
Um
me with those spoilers, Garrett.
Okay, so yeah, you have this main character, the protagonist, fused with this guy named Aogami, right? He's the proto fiend. He is kind of this random other kind of demon or whatever that, hey, yeah, we're supposed to be together. We're linked together, and we're gonna be called the Nahubino, which is symbolizes this being that has that is human but also has the forbidden fruit knowledge and can be as powerful as God, basically, or kind of on that level of power. And then there's this throughout the game, it talks about this power strive throughout all of these separate different factions. Um, okay, so beginning of the game, God is slain, he's destroyed, and so everyone is racing, each individual race, the demons, and then various different factions of the Bethel, which is representing the angelic side of the story. They're racing to get to the throne and command humanity, basically, or command the earth. So yeah, you meet characters along the way. You kind of start out with the Bethel Japan branch. That's kind of like your central hub, and like it feels like your motivations are there. Like it's like, hey, kind of align with the Japan branch. This one's pretty stupid. I think this is really really dumb. So the Japan that you've been living in is not real.
Of course.
That's how they explain it. So you know you meet in the beginning of the game you think you're in Japan, right? You're like, hey, this is Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
You play the first open world and then you go back to that open world and then your group is like, guys, we have actually been not in Japan at all. This is actually destroyed Japan and we've made this certain imaginary bubble around it to make you think like it's Japan. I'm like, why are you doing this?
So it's literally the plot of The Matrix, because literally that's what happens
Yeah.
in The Matrix, Garrett. Spoilers for The Matrix, by the
Yeah.
way.
It adds a lot of confusion to it. Let's see here. I just want to mention some characters in here that are throughout the game there. I think that, I'll explain a little bit what they do. Kind of the important character alongside you is Tao Isano Kami. She is one of the few friends that are in that group with you. She eventually dies and becomes part of like transcends into a angel for you to be in your party, and she actually is kind of just instrumental throughout the end. But she just seemed like a guiding character,
Mm-hmm.
I guess you can say. There wasn't really. She seemed like a leader and like trying to figure out certain cases and like trying to control the conflict that was in Bethel, Japan. But all in all, she dies, comes back, and then becomes this angel demon. And then she tries to get into these sincere and like emotional conversations, and it's just like, guys, this is not. I don't know this character. She's been away with me for 30 hours. Like, what do you expect me to do here?
She almost, it kind
But
of reminds
yeah,
me of, like, because you were talking about how she's like a helpful character. She's like kind of like pointing you in the right direction, helping you control the conflict. She almost reminds me of that, from that description anyways, of someone like Cortana from Halo.
yeah,
Except you just don't care about her because they throw it into the story and think you do care about this character from the sounds of it.
yeah. She dies and she becomes like a huge gap in the story, and then they're like, all right, let's bring her back and let's make her an angel to be in your party. I'm like, cool. She has a very cool skill set as well, which is, I wouldn't say it's important late game, but like it's more like mid to late game because
Right.
she is pretty important. Leveling, by the way, the leveling system really sucks at the end, but I could talk about that
Yeah, but it's
some
also
other
a game,
time.
Garrett, where you're at max level and enemies are still crushing you in one hit.
It's so bad. Oh my gosh, Shiva. Oh my, Shiva is terrible. Okay, and then your two friends, which I think it symbolizes a lot in 4 as well. They completely copy this from 4, where there's these two friends of the protagonist that becomes the major bosses at the end. They represent one motivation or one faction.
Mhm.
One is Yuzuru Atsuta, who he is this cool guy. He is this all-knowing, knowledgeable dude that knows about Nahubino, that knows about the magic, and he kind of figures out from the very beginning how to take care of himself, and kind of tries to be that front type of person that knows all this stuff and tries to not teach you but test you
Mhm.
throughout the game. It's like, hey, do you know this, or hey, do you know that? And then it gets to the point where his motivations lie with Bethel, Japan. And Bethel, Japan is basically like, let all the gods roam free and like just let them figure out themselves what to do with the throne. That's basically what Bethel, Japan is. He becomes he becomes my last boss, actually. The third ending where I destroy the throne.
Mhm.
But yeah, he fuses with, I'll mention this character, Hayo Kojimisu, who you meet in the beginning. He's the leader of the group of Bethel, Japan. But you figure out later that he's not human. He is actually a god demon, and he is actually a brother of your um, the Aogami, your proto fiend, other half of Nahubino. And so there's a lot of conflict there, depending on the choice you make throughout the game. And then this one's the worst one. I can't believe they had this character. Ichiru Dazai reminds me a lot of what's his name? The blonde hair Buzz character in Persona 5.
Ryuji?
Yeah, Ryuji. Yeah. No, he totally reminds me of that.
Of course. The greatest Persona 5 character, by the way, Ryuji.
I I think it's
say
the
that
same voice
sarcastically.
actor too.
Oh,
To be quite honest with you, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like he feels weak throughout the game, and then he figures out he wants to be with this other Bethel Archangel, and that Bethel Archangel is convicted with like God itself, and so he kind of becomes twisted with that boss or that magical being, and they end up being the ultimate demon boss at the end, where he realizes that they need to embrace darkness in order to follow God's rules or whatever.
Mhm.
And he just becomes so weird. He was like in the beginning, super nice, super friendly. Near the end, he has this weird face change at the last area. He's like, now I'm evil and like, but not evil. They try to make it anti-hero-ish
I
in
was
a
gonna say
way.
there's
And
not
I'm
like a
like,
lot of good and evil in this game, anyways. Like there's a lot of blurred lines
yeah.
with a lot of stuff, anyways, with Shin Megami Tensei games. But he probably, it sounds like he pulls like the Snidely Whiplash. He's like, he probably is like twisting his mustache and stuff like that. He's like, I was evil this whole time, you didn't even know it.
Yeah, and he was an interesting character to face at the end. The rest of the students, I won't mention, not really particular, like important in the story
Well,
at
they
all.
live in a simulation world, anyways, Garret. They're not important.
That's so true. It's so weird. It's like, hey, there's these characters, all these characters in here. You're about to start the game, and then they just kind of like broke it off. Like, okay, now you're on your own on this open world, and I'm like, okay, sure. And the story just became lackluster with it. Kind of the last two characters, not even the bosses or the main gods or whatever, I want to mention is Shohei Yakumo and Nuwa. Both of them are bosses throughout the game. They have their own motivations to get to the throne, which I actually chose to destroy the throne. Not giving it to anyone, not controlling it for myself, but destroying it and let humanity figure it out. And so they were an interesting bunch of characters too. They felt like they had their own motivations against the demons in the battle. And I found these characters to be the most interesting ones out of the bunch. They had their own rules, their own agenda. It was kind of cool to see.
Nice.
And then that's pretty much it with the characters and the story. There's 3 endings to it, and an optional 4th ending. This optional 4th ending, you need to complete certain side quests in order to get there.
Right.
And I thought I did it. I thought I triggered all of the side quests, and that's why I defeated this last side quest that leads to this optional boss that's level 96. Right. So basically near like max level. Even my max Nahubino could not beat it at all, which sucks. So I had to change my party a little bit, and I finally beat it. And then I was trying to get through the ending, and it didn't trigger it. And it looked like I just missed a side quest that it never popped up in my screen.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of these kind of obtuse kind of pathways that I went through, and I guess I just didn't trigger a certain side quest in my game, and so I couldn't get the optional 4th ending. But I was totally fine with it. I was ready to be done with this game. I picked an ending, and I was fine with it.
Yeah. Well, it'd be different if you could go back and do like 1 or 2 things and then get that ending again. And then you probably be like, oh, well, I may as well, spend the 5 hours or however long it'll take to do this kind of thing. But yeah, that sounds like it would take like way more work to do that. You'd probably have to like start the game over at this point.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Yeah. I am good where I'm at. If you beat the optional boss, Shiva, the last 2 required bosses are so easy. It's so, and that's another thing with this pacing of this game. It's like, hey, you can beat the super ultra mega boss at the end. So I trained up so much for that. And then to lead to the final boss being like a walk in the park. I was just, yeah, it was just like, oh, come on, guys.
Well, the way you're talking about it, Garret, I know you haven't finished it, but Final Fantasy VII, the original, is actually like that, where there's there are 3 optional bosses you fight in the that you can fight in the world towards the end of the game, like right before the final conflict. And if you beat them, they're like 20 or 30 times harder than the final boss in the game. So it's just if you can beat them, like the final boss is just, you can actually kill the final boss in 1 attack if you know how to do it.
Oh my gosh.
In Final Fantasy VII. Whereas the same using that same trick against the optional bosses is like good luck. Like you might get half their health down, or a quarter of your health down in the case of the hardest boss. So it actually sounds like it takes like a similar trajectory to that, where it's like the optional bosses are like way harder than the final boss, and that's why they're optional, because I mean they're meant to be a challenge. I guess.
Especially the last optional boss. The other optional bosses seemed actually to me. I'm glad I faced them because I was able to like bring my party up, levels up, and everything like that. So I'm able to go to the last dungeon. But that last optional boss, I'm just like, why is it so high? Oh my god! It was the hardest boss I ever faced. So glad I got done with it. But that's pretty much it.
That's it for
Ryan.
spoilers?
I'm done.
It's over.
Yeah. Sorry, I wanted to explain a little bit of these characters in the story and how it turned up. It was a little obtuse.
Not only that, Garret, but who else were you going to vent all this to anyways? I mean, you may as well, we may as well talk it out here. And I hope anyways, if anyone out there who's played Shin Megami Tensei V and we're waiting for someone to talk about the ending with, I'm glad we were able to fulfill that niche at least a little bit here and talk about the endings at least a little bit. Because I know, again, I'm probably not going to get there. I don't know when I go back to this game at some point. But it's good to know. It's good to know things to watch out for. Like, I think, like, if I'm going to go back and play this now, Garret, I'm probably just going to play it, like, with a guide, just knowing, like, hey, here are the things you need to do to get to the cool ending, I guess. So I want to make sure that that's all mapped out if I ever decide to go down that road.
I actually recommend a guide. Yeah, I recommend a guide full-heartedly with this game. And also, if you... I forgot what the price tag was for the DLC, but the DLC for this game adds so much more. It makes it easier, especially with like respawns on certain monsters that get you certain items, and then also gives you new monsters to fuse that actually are essential in certain boss battles. Like Cleopatra, I heard, is one of the kind of like overpowered demons that you could get from a DLC. So anyways,
nice.
Pretty much it.
Well, I think that's probably going to wrap up our conversation about Shin Megami Tensei V, Garret. I mean, this is actually probably the longest episode of the RPG Cave ever, which I'm actually
you're welcome.
Kind of like the same way that Shin Megami Tensei V is probably the longest game that Garret played last year. So there you go. Well, before we go, Garret, plugs go.
You can you can follow me on Twitter at Bland Explosion, and you can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network, where we're live every Thursday nights over at twitch.tv/PSVG. And we're also on the podcast services, including Spotify, Google, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, you can go and subscribe over there.
And, I have to plug the fact that, Garret, it's finally happening.
Yeah.
We're playing Golden Sun. I'm so excited.
We're playing Golden Sun.
You guys are playing Golden Sun. I'm playing along with you. I'm playing on my Wii U. I'll have you know.
Nice.
Because I want us to be able to talk about it. Because I've been like, again, when Garret and I started planning out this show, like one of the episodes I wanted to do, like really was like chomping at the bit to talk about, was Golden Sun. So I'm very excited that we're finally going to get to the point, Garret, where there will be an episode up on the show of us talking about that dang game. It's going to be great.
Yes, definitely. I played the beginning. It's good so far.
Nice. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, on YouTube at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, on Patreon at patreon.com/Carpool Gaming, on podcast services around the globe. So for Garret Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 50th level of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.